Another clean shot. I thought we missed him. I thought it went over him. Sweet.
The red knot is one of several Arctic breeding migrant shorebirds. These birds are amazing in that they breed far in the Arctic, and this species in particular can winter as far away as the southern tip of South America. So we first started working with red knots back in 2009. There was a major concern about decline in the population, particularly in the Atlantic flyway. That was attributable probably to several factors, possibly an issue in Tierra del Fuego, which was their southern wintering grounds, as well as an important spring stopover in Delaware Bay.
At that time, very little was known about the occurrence of red knots across the northern Gulf, though we knew from surveys and birding reports that red knots were quite abundant in the fall and in the spring as well. We began trapping birds on the beaches of the Gulf Coast, particularly on Padre Island and Mustang Island, Texas, and started deploying some small devices called geolocators. Trapping red knots is quite a challenge in that, especially on the beach, we have to first find birds, get a handle for what they're doing and what direction they might be inclined to move, rapidly make a decision on where we're going to set up this cannon net, and get it in place and hope we can move birds into that catch area. The net we use most frequently now is a modified version of the much larger cannon net. It's called a box net, and it was developed by Larry Niles in order to capture small numbers of birds or to specifically target individual birds such as those carrying geolocators. It's a much smaller net. The process is to find a spot, dig a shallow depression, set the net, and stake the back and run a wire back to a hiding spot. We stay in communication through radios so that the person on the beach making the call for firing the net is in communication with the person with the controls to fire it. Once the net goes off, everybody on the team runs to the net and begins the process of extracting the birds from the net so that we can put them in safekeeping cages until we can process them. The purpose of this project was to figure out where birds were actually spending the winter. We knew they were on the beaches in the fall and in the spring, so by deploying and recovering these geolocators on birds, we hope to find out the wintering grounds.
So these birds are notoriously difficult to track for the sole reason that they go so far throughout a year, and it's difficult there aren't very many devices that can track a bird in its live movement. So recovering a geolocator was a really exciting moment for the project, because finally we had essentially a record of where that bird had been. That geolocator is carried on the bird, and we don't actually get that data unless we retrap that bird and recover that geolocator. So it was a really important moment for us. One of the most surprising geolocator recoveries we had was of a bird that we had trapped in the spring, just as we had many others at that time, and deployed this geolocator, and we recovered it 1 year later. And we were partly thinking, well, it probably did similar to what most of these other birds did, but this thing diverged in some very significant ways. First off, it went through the northern Great Plains and then went west, flew direct from Saskatchewan to northwest Alaska, where it went to breed. That makes it a different subspecies, which is important. In the fall following breeding season, it followed down the Pacific coast, stopping around the San Diego and northwest Mexico area, and then on to near the border of Peru and Ecuador. In the winter, it continued on and went to an island called Chiloé in southern Chile, still on the Pacific side. It spent about 6 months there, and suddenly in mid-April, the bird departed from Chiloé and flew direct for 6.5 days, arriving back on the Texas coast 6.5 days later, and we just happened to re-trap the bird the following day. So we wanted to know more about the population of this species across the entire Gulf. So in 2014 we started a project in Louisiana where we know that there were birds coming through, and they were seen a little bit in the fall and also a little bit in the spring, more so in the spring. So we began capturing birds and marking them as we usually do, but we were not finding a lot of those birds in the middle of the winter. They weren't being reported to us. Instead, we were getting reports from places as far away as Panama and southern Chile. So our curiosity grew, and we decided this past year we obtained some funding to put some geolocators on birds in Louisiana, and we hope to start retrieving those next year and figure out where birds are spending the rest of their year and how they're coming through Louisiana in the spring.
Tell me about the Snickers.
I'm not sure exactly how it started, but Snickers has sort of been a staple food for most of our trapping. It certainly satisfies, and it keeps my crew from getting the hangries. So people sometimes ask why should we care about this bird, this species or any other. But when you think about what this bird goes through over the course of a year, and how finely tuned an indicator it is of how we are treating the planet and these different wetland systems, and if you don't think that we simply have a responsibility to take care of the animals, it might just be one other bird today, but tomorrow it might be a fish that you do care about, or it might be the shrimp that you would like to have on your plate for dinner tonight. When a species is in decline like this, it's important that we take notice, because the sites that these birds depend on are also sites that we depend on. It might seem strange to think that a little shorebird that doesn't resemble us or utilize the world in the same way we do at all is actually depending on the system. It's an important component of the system, and if it's declining, then there's probably a problem that is going to affect us in some way or another.